In 2015, the quiet Welsh village of Beddau made headlines around the world after mystery surrounded a body found outside a block of flats.
The discovery was just the start of a bizarre murder investigation filled with twists and turns. The story is the subject of a new documentary. Let's take a look.
Thank you, ladies. Both of them in an hour's time.
How well do you actually know your neighbour? How well do we know anybody, really?
We just found a dead body in Beddau.
How could this happen in a small community where everybody knows everybody?
Every homicide is unique. In this case, it was absolutely bizarre. We didn't know who the victim was.
What the heck has gone on there?
None of us could believe what we had found.
And we're joined now by criminologist David Wilson and one of the local villagers, Mary West. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for coming in, guys.
David, we'll start with you. Let's go back to 2015. A body was found in a quiet Welsh village. And, I mean, Mary, we'll come to you a bit later. I can imagine it's like nothing you've seen before. Who found it?
Yeah. So, in one sense, this is a very simple story that's going to get dark very quickly.
Yeah.
So, if we go back to November 2015 in Beddau in South Wales, a woman called Michelle James, who lives in a block of flats connected to a garden, is going to discover what she thought was a medical skeleton. Her friend was a woman called Lee Sabine. Lee Sabine had died the month previously in the October 2015, and there had always been a joke that Lee had told to Michelle that there was a medical skeleton buried in the garden attached to the flats. Now, that had some credibility because Lee had once trained as a nurse and worked as a nurse, so it may very well have been credible that she had buried a medical skeleton. Michelle was a bit of a prankster, wanted to, with a friend, Rhiannon Lee, wanted to dig up the medical skeleton and play a joke on one of their friends. They therefore go to the garden, start digging up the garden, and they find a package that's wrapped and wrapped and wrapped. And very quickly, when they try and unwrap this package, they discover material, viscous material, which clearly implies, as well as the smell, it's not a medical skeleton at all, it's a real body.
And it's so mad that this is how it all started, and it leads to this huge sort of murder investigation. But wasn't there some confusion about how old the body was in the first place?
Joe, that's absolutely right. Because the body had been wrapped and wrapped and wrapped, it effectively, it was like vacuum wrapping a human body, and therefore the decomposition that one would normally expect has not taken place, and therefore the police originally believe, oh, Michelle, who had heard about this and started to dig up, this must be somebody she knew, and the victim must have been relatively recently killed. But of course, it was simply the fact that the body had been wrapped and wrapped and wrapped, and in fact, it was the body not of somebody that Michelle knew, but somebody that Lee Sabine had known, her husband.
So when did the police focus, you know, when did the attention go onto Lee's husband?
Yeah. Well, because the police initially, obviously, they did arrest Michelle, and therefore they tried to rule her out by looking at her partners. And when they discovered that her partners were all happily alive, they realised, well, wait a minute, this can't be somebody that she knew. Let's think about the fact that she keeps saying that she was told by this woman, Lee Sabine, that there was a body buried in the garden. So that's when the attention begins to focus on John Sabine, who was Lee's husband, who initially moved into the flats with together in 1997.
Yes.
But then he slightly disappears.
Yes.
Almost immediately. By 1998, he's no longer there. Lee says, oh, my husband's run off with another woman, that's why he's not been seen. But in fact, he'd been murdered by her and buried in the back garden.
This, like, what a way. I mean, I'm sure this is not what Michelle was thinking when she thought, I'm going to do a prank on my friend.
Yeah.
Like, then this has snowballs to this horrific murder case, which I can imagine just disrupted such a small area. So, Mary, we'll come to you now. When did you first meet Lee?
Well, I was aware of her presence in the village for some time, but in the last
6 months of my mother's life in 2014. She had terminal cancer, and I'm one of 5 children, and we would visit the flat a lot. And Lee would pop in, and she would say things like, "Oh, I was a nurse, darling. I can help you look after your mother." Well, we sort of didn't want that particularly, but then she would talk about her medical skeleton. Well, my mother died in the February, and then I didn't visit the flats then. And then in the June, I heard that she was in hospital. So I went to visit her. And pretty soon it became that sort of, she was telling people I was her executor, I was her carer. And I went to pick her up, visit her once, and she was there in hospital saying, "I'm discharging myself." So I took her back to her flat, and the first thing she said to me was, "Oh, this place needs a deep clean." Well, I thought that was strange. But another thing, when she was in hospital, it was an upstairs flat and she always had all the windows open. So I closed the windows, and when I went to the hospital, I said, "Oh, I've closed the windows." And she said, "Oh, don't do that." I said, "Why?" And she said, "Oh, the flat always smells of smoke," because she was a heavy smoker. "I want the windows left open." And I know, I did sort of think, yeah, that was a bit weird. Anyway, I mean, I got her into the local hospice, and she was there for 3 days. And then she died. And then 2 weeks later, and then I conducted her funeral as well. Wow. And interestingly, she had instructions about the funeral. And one thing was that she wanted the coffin to go down to "Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye," which is pretty ironic. And then 2 weeks later, the police rang me and said, "Do you know anything about a body?"
So how did you feel when you found out that, you know, a very close friend was a murder suspect?
And you don't know that person.
No. I mean, she had a way of... She'd get you to talk about yourself. But then if you sort of asked her about herself, she'd say something like, "Oh, that's a story for a bottle of wine, darling."
Wow.
Right.
And she
sort
would
of kicking it down the road.
Yes, that's what she would do. And, I mean, everybody in the community had accepted her. And I think a lot of us felt as though she'd betrayed the trust of the community.
Yeah.
And the point that Mary's making, she's using that phrase, darling. Lisa Beam was a larger-than-life character. Flamboyant, narcissistic. She wanted to live a life less ordinary. She told stories. She was a cabaret artist.
Oh, she
was
did.
From New Zealand. She was from Australia. In fact, she was from Wales.
She was, and which is something we found out. You know, she was from about 20 miles up the road.
Oh.
Wow. And she created this persona.
Like, it's almost living a lie. And I suppose, for you personally, Mary, I would feel very confused, very hurt. You're helping somebody in such a difficult time, and she's popping in to see your mother, and you've sort of forged that close relationship, and we're actually helping somebody.
Yes.
But then when they pass, you then know nothing about them, and it's too late to sort of confront them.
It is.
A certain, you know, a conversation. It must be quite tough.
It was tough, yeah, because she... You know, everything she'd said was a lie. And we were wondering what else we would find. And, of course, so many layers, literally, not only with the body, but so many layers of the story have emerged since.
And this isn't just a lie, like, you know, oh, you found out that she was living a double life or something you didn't quite know about.
No.
This is that you were actually friends with a murderer.
Yes.
And who'd hidden that murder for nearly 2 decades.
Wow.
Yes.
She was doing this in front of the community.
She was.
All the time that John Sabine was buried in the garden, and frankly, we still don't know how he gets from the flat to the back garden. That's still not particularly open. But she's doing this in plain sight. She's living this murder in plain sight. And she comes across really as a narcissistic woman who is revealing to the community sometimes that there is a dead body in the garden.
Yes.
I'm going to be famous, darling, when I'm dead because of the body in the garden. So this is somebody who has a parapraxis. She's got a Freudian slip. She's desperate to reveal to the community that there's someone hidden in the back garden.
Yes, absolutely.
It's that drip feeding, like nuggets.
It was.
Kind of...
And suddenly when you go and you piece it all together and sort of figure out this documentary is right up my street.
It's
absolutely amazing.
We know what we're doing tonight.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, how do you feel like it being back in the news now? How do you feel like it being sort of brought back up again, Mary?
Well, it's quite interesting because, you know, for nearly 40 years, I taught in the local comprehensive school, and wherever I go, there is, "Oh, miss, can we have your autograph?" And it's quite funny, or I've had messages from people, what are you doing in my television? You know, those...
yeah. In a way,
So, yeah,
you never thought you'd be seen.
No,
I can only
absolutely
imagine.
not.
So
you know.
Well, thank you for
so
coming
much.
to talk to us today.
So,
and
so
thank you for
interesting.
breaking it down as you always do.
On Sky documentaries now, I believe.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
It just